It's astounding how House Republicans continue to push an agenda that people are simply not asking for. They voted to cut veterans' benefits, raise costs, and, like we're seeing today, enrich the wealthiest corporations, especially the fossil fuel industry. Nevertheless, though, we have 6 bills before us, so let's get into them. H.R. 6285 would fast-track drilling for oil and gas in the pristine Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Bering Sea. We're going to hear about how we need to destroy these places to help with energy prices, but that is simply not true. The United States is already the #1 producer of oil and the #1 producer and exporter of gas. All that has done is increase carbon emissions and enrich an industry that is already seeing record profits. Meanwhile, consumers still face volatile prices. That's for 2 reasons. The first is price gouging by the oil and gas industry, and the second is that oil and gas are global commodities. No amount of endless drilling can shield us from price shocks when OPEC decides to raise prices or when Russia decides to start a war in Europe. If we want energy independence, we should be transitioning to solar, wind, geothermal, and other clean energy sources that aren't subject to those kinds of shocks, and that create good union jobs right here at home. Oil and gas already enjoy an obscene wealth of tax giveaways in this country, special loopholes, and other subsidies as well. But we're supposed to believe that if we continue to let them drill just a little more, that they will finally lower their prices. This is all trickle-down nonsense. This bill is a giveaway to some of the wealthiest and most damaging polluters in the United States.
That debate aside, right? Debate for a different day. If you follow those mandates, you got to have a massive, massive amount of battery production. And by all indication, the vast majority of that Congo production is controlled by China. A huge amount of that has child labor and other issues that we've talked about, and you got trafficked child slaves that are reported in the production of it. Why on earth would we want to limit the ability of Americans to go mine cobalt? Now, I might say, well, that's kind of great because I actually still want the internal combustion engine. I actually think it's more affordable and better for the American worker who wants the plumber in San Marcos, Texas, to be able to go to work and afford the car. But if you buy into the motion of having, EVs that you can drive all over creation, even if you're from Texas and you had to do like I did, I appreciate the chairman pointing out the passing of my grandma. I had to drive 6 hours, like 300 miles to go see my grandma on Thursday before she passed away, and 6 hours back. I couldn't do that in an EV. I wouldn't be able to make the round trip in time. But okay, assume we were able to ever produce the batteries that last long enough, the charging stations, all the stuff. Why would we get rid of the American production of it?
Thank you. There are several different components to your question. I want to make sure that I address them. First and foremost, on the issue of child exploitation, child labor, I think it is the role of the United States for us to push back forcefully on this production, and not just in the production of energy, but across the board. We see this in textile production, energy production, cobalt mining. It is horrific, and we need to make sure that our sources do not include child labor. But to get to the core of the question, too, on the China front, is that I find it interesting that there is this concern about Chinese ownership of minerals, and it is legitimate. However, the response to that seems to be deregulation specifically for companies that are largely Chinese-owned here in the United States. These companies are subsidiaries where the benefit of what we are deregulating here, and I'll give you a specific example. I would be remiss not to mention that the minerals produced specifically at the proposed Twin Metals mine that is implicated in this legislation would most likely be shipped to China for refining and smelting to be sold on the global market. These are not American-owned companies that American mined minerals would be going to. And so if your concern is the Chinese predominance of ownership in the mining market, I would be very concerned about passing this legislation. So that, I think, on the China piece there. And lastly, on the meeting our targets and mining cobalt. I think it's a false choice to say that in order for us to mine cobalt, we either have to destroy some of the most sacred lands in the United States, or rely on child labor. There's responsible mining in the United States that is available to us. But secondly, I also find it interesting that the majority presently pushes back against battery recycling, which would allow us to open the path to reducing our reliance on mining in general. There is enormous potential in recycling many of these EV batteries, but we have not made the investments or the shifts necessary in order to unlock that so that we can reduce our reliance on solely mining as the only source of battery. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that.
I want to close, Mr. Chairman. I heard you say that it is important that this Congress take strong stands against hate. But I'm going to be honest with you. When I look at the agenda of my friends, the anti-LGBTQ agenda, the anti-women's rights agenda, the anti-civil rights agenda, basically trying to undermine our civil rights laws, or the indifference my friends have shown when the former president hangs around with white supremacists like Nick Fuentes. Nothing is said. So this selective outrage is really quite interesting to me. But we should combat hate wherever it is. And again, people will look at this bill and decide whether or not this is the right way to go. But my understanding is that my Republican friends have been working overtime to try to defund the Office on Civil Rights, which I think would be responsible for implementing what is recommended in this bill. Boy, it's interesting. You want to give the office more responsibility on one hand, but you want to underfund on the other hand. I can't quite figure you guys out. But in any event, I welcome our witnesses and look forward to their testimony. I yield back.
So, you know, I didn't vote for one of these resolutions that came to the floor. This is why I'm reluctant. I mean, I intend to vote for the rule, but we're just getting worn out by these resolutions. We've done 36 now since Mike Johnson became Speaker, and we've sliced it and diced it every way you can do it. Everybody's introduced almost at this point a bill to deal with something along these lines since October 7th. None of them actually get to anything real. I think it's a political ping pong game. Of course, we get to serve every time. And a lot of these are just political traps. I call them sticky traps designed to split the Democrat Party and get them stuck in the sticky trap. And I've gotten stuck in almost every one of them myself because I believe absolutely in the First Amendment. And I don't vote for foreign aid. And I actually think a lot of people here are a little bit xenophobic with all of their resolutions against other countries and all of the sanctions against these other countries. So I've never voted for a sanction. So every one of these bills that comes forward, we hope to get the Democrats in the sticky trap. And I always end up there. And then I ended up with, for voting no against one of these, $90,000 of ads run against me in my district by AIPAC, by their super PAC, because I didn't vote for one of these resolutions. And I think it's ridiculous. And